You don't deserve this meal. People like you should know your place." Flight attendant Brianna Moore's words cut through the first-class cabin like a knife as she yanked the hot towel and menu from Olivia Washington's hands. The 28 other passengers in the premium cabin watched in stunned silence as discrimination played out before their eyes at 35,000 feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia sat perfectly still, her expression composed despite the public humiliation, her dark fingers still extended where the menu had been moments before. She wore a simple black blazer over a cream blouse, pearl earrings catching the cabin light as she slowly lowered her hand to her lap. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Olivia said, her voice steady and measured. "I'm in seat 3A, which includes meal service according to the ticket I purchased." Brianna's smile was cold, professional on the surface but laced with disdain. "There's no misunderstanding. I know exactly what seat you're in. I also know how people like you manage to get up here when you clearly don't belong." The cabin fell silent. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats, but no one intervened. Some even nodded in quiet agreement. A businessman across the aisle muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Finally someone maintaining standards up here." Olivia took a deep breath, maintaining the composure that had carried her through 15 years of similar moments. The store security guard who followed her through Nordstrom, the real estate agent who forgot to show her the best properties, the restaurant host who claimed no reservations were available despite the half-empty dining room. "I'd like to see your supervisor, please," Olivia requested, her tone professional but firm. Brianna laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Sweetie, I am the supervisor on this flight. And I've decided you don't get meal service. You can either accept that quietly or create a scene that will end with you being met by security when we land in Dallas." From the window seat beside Olivia, an elderly white man in an expensive suit observed the interaction with narrowed eyes. He'd been engrossed in financial reports since boarding and hadn't spoken to anyone, but now he looked up, studying both women with calculated interest. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone accustomed to being heard. Brianna's demeanor shifted instantly, her smile warming as she addressed him. "No problem at all, sir. Just explaining our service parameters to this passenger." The man glanced at Olivia, then back to Brianna. "I see. And what exactly are those parameters that exclude my seatmate from receiving the same service I'll be getting?" Caught off guard, Brianna fumbled for a response. "Sir, this is a first-class cabin matter. I'm simply maintaining the standards our premium passengers expect." "Interesting." The man closed his folder of financial reports. "And what standards would those be?" The woman beside me is dressed professionally, seated in a first-class seat she presumably paid for, and has requested service politely. What parameter exactly is she failing to meet? Passengers who had been pretending not to watch now stared openly. Several had phones out, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Brianna's smile tightened. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't understand the situation. Some passengers use various methods to access premium cabins they haven't properly paid for." "Is that so?" The man raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you determine that was the case here? Did you check her boarding pass? Verify her ticket purchase? Or did you make an assumption based on something else entirely?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Olivia remained silent, watching the interaction unfold. This wasn't the first time she'd experienced discrimination, but it was the first time a stranger had intervened so directly. She studied the elderly man beside her. His tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His silver hair perfectly groomed, his manner that of someone who expected to be obeyed. Brianna sensed the shifting dynamic but doubled down. "Sir, I've been flying this route for 8 years. I know all our regular premium passengers, and I can spot an upgrade scammer from a mile away." 8 years? The man nodded thoughtfully. "That's quite a tenure with Horizon Airlines. Started around 2016 then?" Something in his tone made Brianna hesitate. "Yes, that's right." "Interesting." He reached for the call button above his seat. "I think we need to elevate this conversation. Sir, that won't be necessary. I'm handling this situation according to company guidelines. Are you? The man pressed the button anyway. I'd very much like to see those guidelines. Specifically, the ones that authorize flight attendants to deny service based on visual profiling. A second flight attendant appeared, a younger man named Jackson according to his name tag. How can I help you, sir? Jackson, the elderly man said with the confidence of someone reading from a script he'd written himself. I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant and the captain immediately regarding a serious case of passenger discrimination. Jackson blinked in surprise. Sir, Brianna is our lead flight attendant for first class. If there's an issue, the man interrupted, is that your lead attendant has refused meal service to this passenger based solely on discriminatory assumptions. I'd like this addressed immediately by the captain before we consider next steps. Brianna's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing genuine concern. Jackson, everything is under control here. This passenger was being disruptive. That's a lie, Olivia said, breaking her silence. Her voice remained calm, but carried unmistakable strength. I said nothing except to request the meal service included with my ticket and then to ask for a supervisor when that was denied. Several passengers nodded in confirmation, the tide of opinion visibly shifting in the cabin. Jackson looked increasingly uncomfortable. I'll speak with the captain. As he hurried away, Brianna leaned down, her voice a harsh whisper meant only for Olivia to hear. You're making a big mistake. I can make the rest of this flight very uncomfortable for you. The elderly man cleared his throat. That sounded remarkably like a threat, Ms. Moore. I'd advise against making the situation worse for yourself. Brianna straightened, startled that he'd used her last name. I don't believe I mentioned my last name, sir. You didn't need to, he replied simply. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted entirely. Passengers who had been passive observers were now actively watching, many recording discreetly on their phones. The businessman who had supported Brianna earlier was suddenly very interested in the safety card in his seat pocket. Olivia sat straight in her seat, maintaining the dignity that had carried her through countless similar situations. Her hands were folded in her lap, her expression composed, but anyone looking closely might notice the tension in her shoulders, the slight tightening around her eyes, the physical manifestation of having to prove yet again that she belonged in a space she had every right to occupy. 5 minutes passed in tense silence before the cockpit door opened and Captain Reed emerged. A 20-year veteran with a commanding presence, he made his way to row 3, where Jackson briefed him in hushed tones. Ma'am, sir? The captain addressed both Olivia and the elderly man. I understand there's been some confusion about our service protocols. Not confusion, the elderly man corrected. Discrimination. Your lead flight attendant refused service to this passenger without cause and made it clear the decision was based on her appearance. Captain Reed's expression remained neutral, but his eyes darted between Brianna and the elderly man. I see. Ms. Moore, can you explain the situation? Brianna straightened her uniform. Captain, this passenger became argumentative when I explained our service timing. I was simply trying to maintain the professional atmosphere our premium passengers expect. That's not true, Olivia said firmly. I was denied a hot towel and menu that had been given to every other passenger in this cabin. When I politely asked why, I was told, and I quote, "People like you should know your place." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Several passengers nodded in confirmation. The captain's expression hardened. Ms. Moore, please join me in the galley. As they stepped away, Olivia turned to the man beside her. Thank you for speaking up. Most people don't. He studied her with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything. Most people find it easier to ignore injustice than confront it. I've never understood that perspective. Still, you didn't have to get involved. Actually, I did. He extended his hand. Richard Blackwell. Olivia shook his hand, recognition dawning. Of Blackwell Capital Group? He nodded slightly. You're familiar with our work? I should be, she replied. I analyzed your last 3 quarterly reports as part of my MBA program at Wharton. Blackwell's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. Did you indeed? And what was your assessment? That your pivot towards sustainable infrastructure investments in underserved communities was both ethically sound and financially shrewd. The 22% return on the Detroit water project proved that. For the first time, Blackwell smiled. Most analysts missed that connection. They saw the social responsibility angle, but failed to recognize the long-term financial strategy. Olivia was about to respond when Captain Reed returned alone, his expression grim but professional. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of Horizon Airlines, I want to extend our sincere apologies for the treatment you've experienced. The situation is being addressed, and Ms. Moore will not be serving this cabin for the remainder of the flight." "Thank you, Captain," Olivia said. "Additionally," Reed continued, "we'd like to offer—" "Captain," Richard Blackwell interrupted, "while your apology is appreciated, I believe this situation warrants more than standard customer service recovery procedures." Reed's expression shifted subtly as he seemed to recognize Blackwell for the first time. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't realize you were on board today. Of course we take this matter extremely seriously." "Do you?" Blackwell removed a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to the captain. "When we land in Dallas, I'd like a meeting with your CEO, Nathan Reynolds. I believe you have his direct number." Reed stared at the card, visibly processing the implications. "Yes, sir. I'll make that call immediately." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Jackson arrived with a complete table setting for Olivia, his hands slightly shaking as he arranged everything with exaggerated care. "Ms. Washington, can I get you anything else? Perhaps a glass of champagne before your meal?" "Water is fine, thank you," Olivia replied. When Jackson left, Blackwell turned to her. "MBA from Wharton. Impressive. What's your focus?" "Ethical investment strategies in emerging markets," Olivia replied. "My dissertation examined how targeted capital deployment can create sustainable economic ecosystems in historically underinvested communities." "A subject close to my heart," Blackwell acknowledged. "And your professional background?" 5 years at Goldman Sachs, then 3 at the Federal Reserve. "I'm currently considering several options for my next move." Blackwell studied her with new interest. "You know Ms. Washington?" "Olivia, please." "Olivia. I find it fascinating that of all the people on this aircraft who might have experienced Ms. Moore's particular brand of customer service, it happened to be you, seated next to me." Olivia's expression remained neutral. "Fascinating isn't the word I'd choose. Unfortunately, it's not particularly uncommon." "I imagine not," Blackwell agreed, "but the timing is rather extraordinary. You see, I'm on my way to a board meeting at Horizon Airlines headquarters in Dallas." Understanding dawned on Olivia's face. "You're an investor." "The primary investor," Blackwell corrected. "Blackwell Capital Group owns 34% of Horizon Airlines, making us the largest shareholder by a significant margin." The revelation hung in the air between them as Jackson returned with their meals, his service now excessively attentive. Around them, passengers who had overheard the conversation whispered among themselves, the story already spreading throughout the cabin. "So when you asked for a meeting with the CEO," Olivia began. "It wasn't a request so much as a scheduling matter," Blackwell confirmed. "The board meeting was already on the calendar, but the agenda has just expanded significantly." As they ate their meals, Blackwell asked Olivia thoughtful questions about her research, her career aspirations, and her perspectives on the investment industry. It was the kind of professional conversation she'd sought for years, one based on respect for her intellect rather than preconceptions about her capabilities. "You mentioned you're considering options for your next career move," Blackwell said as their plates were cleared. "Have you considered the impact investment sector? There's substantial work to be done in aligning capital with meaningful social change." "It's my primary area of interest," Olivia confirmed. "But finding the right opportunity has been challenging. Many firms talk about impact investing but treat it as a marketing strategy rather than a genuine commitment." Blackwell nodded in understanding. "The gap between rhetoric and action in our industry is unfortunately wide. However, there are exceptions." Their conversation continued for the remainder of the flight, touching on economic theory, market trends, and the future of sustainable finance. For Olivia, it was both validating and energizing to engage with someone who valued her expertise without qualification or surprise. As the aircraft began its descent into Dallas, Blackwell handed Olivia his business card. Unlike the standard cards passed between professionals, this one bore his personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. "I have a car waiting at the terminal," he said. "I'd like you to join me for my meeting with Horizon's executive team if you're amenable." Olivia hesitated. "That's a generous offer, but may I ask why?" "2 reasons," Blackwell replied. "First, your direct experience today represents exactly the kind of systemic issue the board needs to address. Second, I believe your expertise in ethical investment strategies could be valuable to the conversation we need to have." She considered the invitation carefully. "To be clear, I'm not interested in being used as a prop in a corporate disciplinary action." "Nor would I suggest it," Blackwell assured her. "I'm inviting you as a finance professional whose insights I've found valuable during our conversation, and who happens to have first-hand experience with the problem we need to solve." The aircraft touched down smoothly, and as they taxied to the gate, Captain Reed made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Local time is 2:45 p.m. For passengers connecting to other flights, please check the monitors for gate information. For those disembarking, we thank you for choosing Horizon Airlines." What he didn't mention was the text message he'd just received from CEO Nathan Reynolds. Blackwell called. "Executive team assembling in the boardroom. Critical situation. Bring the flight attendant directly from the aircraft." As passengers began gathering their belongings, Olivia made her decision. "I'll join your meeting, Mr. Blackwell, on one condition." "Which is?" "That any solutions discussed address the systemic issues, not just the individual incident." Blackwell's expression reflected genuine approval. "Ms. Washington, that's precisely what I was hoping you'd say." The cabin doors opened, and as first-class passengers moved toward the exit, they noticed something unusual: a group of suits waiting at the jet bridge instead of the typical gate agents. Among them stood a man whose face appeared on the business pages of major newspapers. Nathan Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Airlines, had come personally to meet the flight. What had begun as a routine act of discrimination was about to become a catalyst for change that would ripple through an entire industry. And Olivia Washington, who had entered that aircraft as just another passenger forced to justify her presence, was about to help reshape the very company that had failed her. The tension was palpable as Olivia Washington and Richard Blackwell walked through the jet bridge toward the waiting delegation. Behind them, Brianna Moore was being escorted by Captain Reed, her face ashen as the reality of the situation dawned on her. Nathan Reynolds, a trim man in his 50s with calculated eyes, extended his hand first to Blackwell. "Richard, unexpected to see you arrive ahead of schedule. We were planning to meet you at the office." "Circumstances changed," Blackwell replied, his tone measured but carrying unmistakable authority. He gestured to Olivia. "This is Olivia Washington, MBA from Wharton, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, 3 at the Federal Reserve. She'll be joining our meeting." Reynolds' practiced smile faltered slightly as he shook Olivia's hand. "Ms. Washington, a pleasure. Though I'm afraid our board meeting is closed to—" "She's not here for the board meeting," Blackwell interrupted. "She's here for the crisis meeting we're about to have regarding the discriminatory treatment she experienced on your airline 30 minutes ago." The group of executives exchanged glances. A woman in a tailored suit stepped forward. "I'm Victoria Chen, Chief Operating Officer. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." "An excellent suggestion," Blackwell agreed. As they moved through the terminal toward the airline's private suite, passengers from the flight watched with curiosity. Several had their phones out, recording the procession. The incident in first class had already begun circulating on social media under #Horizon Discrimination. Brianna Moore walked several paces behind, escorted by Captain Reed and a stern-looking woman who had been introduced as Amanda Torres, head of human resources. The flight attendant's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the nervous demeanor of someone watching their career implode in real time. The private suite door closed behind them, shutting out the curious eyes and recording phones of the terminal. Inside, a large conference table had been hastily prepared with water bottles, notepads, and an atmosphere of barely contained crisis. "Before we begin," Reynolds said, gesturing for everyone to take seats, "I want to extend our sincerest apologies to Ms. Washington for whatever misunderstanding occurred on today's flight." Misunderstanding, Olivia repeated, the word hanging in the air. Is that what you call it when your lead flight attendant tells a first-class passenger, people like you should know your place? Reynolds' expression tightened. If that language was used, it's completely unacceptable and doesn't reflect Horizon's values. If, Blackwell echoed. Are you questioning Ms. Washington's account? Not at all, Reynolds backtracked quickly. I simply meant we haven't yet heard Ms. Moore's perspective on the interaction. All eyes turned to Brianna, who sat rigidly at the far end of the table. Captain Reed had positioned himself strategically beside her, as if anticipating she might attempt to leave. Ms. Moore, Torres prompted, would you like to explain what happened? Brianna straightened her uniform, a reflexive gesture of professionalism that seemed painfully ironic given the circumstances. There was a service misunderstanding. The passenger seemed unfamiliar with first-class protocols, and I attempted to explain our procedures. By denying me the hot towel and menu provided to every other passenger? Olivia asked calmly. I was planning to return with your service items, Brianna insisted. There was a temporary delay due to galley preparations. Olivia maintained perfect composure, and the phrase, people like you should know your place. Was that also part of your standard service protocol? The room fell silent. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I don't recall using those exact words, Brianna said finally. Richard Blackwell placed his phone on the table and pressed play on a recording. Brianna's voice emerged with crystal clarity. You don't deserve this meal. People like you should know your place. The executives' expressions ranged from shock to dismay. Torres closed her eyes briefly, as if physically pained by what she was hearing. Where did you get that? Brianna demanded, her composure cracking. The passenger in 4C was recording the entire interaction, Blackwell explained. He sent it to me when he realized who I was. He's not the only one. At least 7 different recordings of the incident are currently circulating online. Reynolds paled visibly. Online? Victoria Chen was already on her tablet, scrolling through social media. It's trending. #Horizon discrimination has over 2,000 posts in the last hour. The most shared video has 47,000 views and climbing. This isn't just about one incident, Olivia said, her voice calm but carrying undeniable strength. This is about a culture that allows such incidents to occur without consequence. Blackwell nodded in agreement. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Nathan, I want to know exactly how Horizon Airlines plans to address not just this specific situation, but the systemic issues it represents. Reynolds glanced at his executive team, then back to Blackwell. Richard, you know we take diversity and inclusion seriously. We have annual training programs, clear policies against discrimination, and a zero-tolerance approach to prejudicial behavior. Clearly not zero tolerance, Blackwell countered, or Ms. Moore would have been terminated long before today. Torres looked up sharply. What do you mean by that? Ms. Moore has been the subject of 17 passenger complaints over the last 8 years, Blackwell stated. 14 involved passengers of color receiving substandard service in premium cabins. The revelation stunned the room. Reynolds turned to Torres with barely concealed anger. Is this accurate? The HR director consulted her tablet frantically. I'm checking the records now. There were complaints, yes, but they were handled at the regional level and classified as service inconsistencies, not discrimination incidents. Convenient categorization, Olivia observed. It allows the company to avoid acknowledging systemic patterns. Victoria Chen, who had been quietly assessing the situation, finally spoke up. Ms. Washington is right. We've been tracking the wrong metrics. If 17 similar complaints didn't trigger an escalation, our system is fundamentally flawed. Reynolds appeared increasingly desperate to contain the situation. We can implement additional training immediately. Review all complaint categorizations. Issue a public statement condemning discriminatory behavior. That's not enough, Blackwell said flatly. Not for me, not for the board, and certainly not for the customers you've failed. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Captain Reed, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. If I may, I've been flying for Horizon for 20 years. This isn't an isolated incident. We all know it happens, but the culture discourages reporting problems up the chain. Reynolds looked betrayed. Captain Reed, it's time for honesty. Reed continued firmly. Regional managers bury discrimination complaints to maintain their performance metrics. Flight crews cover for each other. And executives pretend not to notice as long as the numbers look good on quarterly reports. The brutal assessment hung in the air like a physical presence. No one at the table could deny its accuracy. Olivia leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, I analyze companies for a living. The problem you're facing isn't unique to Horizon or even to the airline industry. It's what happens when organizations prioritize appearance over substance, metrics over morality. What exactly are you suggesting? Reynolds asked, his tone defensive. A complete restructuring of how you handle discrimination incidents. Olivia replied without hesitation. Transparent reporting, independent oversight, real consequences for violations. And most importantly, a cultural shift that begins at the executive level. Richard Blackwell nodded in approval. As Horizon's largest shareholder, I'm formally requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss these exact measures. But before that happens, I want to hear what immediate actions you intend to take regarding today's incident. All eyes turned to Reynolds, who found himself in the uncomfortable position of performing damage control in front of the one person who could end his career with a single vote. Ms. Moore's employment will be terminated effective immediately, he began. We'll issue a public apology to Ms. Washington and compensate her appropriately for the distress caused. I'm not interested in compensation, Olivia interjected. I'm interested in meaningful change. Reynolds continued, increasingly desperate to regain control of the situation. We'll implement a comprehensive review of all customer complaints from the past 5 years to identify potential discrimination patterns. Mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff. A task force to examine our corporate culture. Those are just words, Blackwell interrupted. Standard crisis management platitudes. Ms. Washington deserves better. Your customers deserve better. And as your majority shareholder, I demand better. The silence that followed was broken only by Brianna Moore, who had been watching her career disintegrate before her eyes. This is ridiculous. One interaction with a difficult passenger, and suddenly the entire airline needs to be restructured? I was maintaining standards. That's my job. Victoria Chen turned to her with cold precision. Your job, Ms. Moore, was to provide exceptional service to all our premium passengers. Instead, you chose to humiliate someone based on your personal prejudices. That choice has now jeopardized our entire company's reputation and potentially millions in shareholder value. Brianna appeared genuinely shocked, as if only now grasping the magnitude of the situation. But she didn't look like she belonged there. The naked prejudice in the statement silenced the room. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the final nail in the corporate coffin. Olivia studied Brianna with calm assessment rather than anger. Ms. Moore, I've encountered people with your mindset throughout my career. You believe there's a certain look to success, to belonging in premium spaces. That belief isn't just morally wrong, it's factually incorrect and professionally devastating, as you're now discovering. Blackwell turned to Reynolds. Nathan, I think we've heard enough. Ms. Moore needs to be escorted from the premises immediately. Her final paycheck will include no severance, and her employee file should clearly indicate the reason for termination to ensure she cannot simply move to another airline and continue this behavior. Torres nodded in agreement. I'll handle it personally. As Brianna was led from the room, her expression a mixture of shock and indignation, Blackwell focused his attention on Reynolds. Now let's discuss real solutions. For the next hour, the group engaged in the kind of frank conversation rarely heard in corporate boardrooms. Captain Reed described the unspoken pressures faced by flight crews to ignore discriminatory behavior. Victoria Chen acknowledged the flaws in their complaint categorization system. Torres admitted that HR had prioritized avoiding liability over addressing root causes. Throughout the discussion, Olivia offered insights drawn from her financial background, pointing out the measurable costs of discrimination. not just in potential lawsuits and social media crises, but in talent retention, customer loyalty, and brand perception. Companies consistently undervalue the economic impact of inclusivity, she explained. They view diversity initiatives as cost centers rather than drivers of sustainable growth. The data shows otherwise. Reynolds, initially defensive, gradually shifted to a more reflective posture as the conversation progressed. You're right. We've treated diversity as a checkbox exercise rather than a core business strategy. Which brings us to next steps, Blackwell said, checking his watch. The board meeting begins in 30 minutes. Nathan, I expect you to present a comprehensive plan addressing everything we've discussed today. Reynolds looked alarmed. 30 minutes isn't enough time to develop a strategic overhaul of our entire approach to. I've already drafted the framework, Olivia interrupted, opening her tablet and displaying a meticulously organized document titled Horizon Transformation Initiative. I developed similar protocols during my time at the Federal Reserve. With your permission, I can walk the board through this approach. The executives stared in amazement at the comprehensive strategy before them, one that addressed both immediate crisis management and long-term cultural transformation. When did you have time to create this? Chen asked, clearly impressed. I started outlining it while experiencing discrimination in your first-class cabin, Olivia replied simply. Converting negative experiences into constructive solutions is a survival skill many of us have had to develop. The weight of her words settled over the room. For perhaps the first time, these executives were glimpsing the reality faced by so many of their customers. The constant mental calculations, the energy diverted to managing others, prejudices, the exhausting vigilance required to navigate spaces designed to exclude. Blackwell studied Olivia with growing respect. Ms. Washington, I believe the board would benefit tremendously from hearing this presentation directly from you. Reynolds looked ready to object but thought better of it. I agree. Your perspective would be illuminating for our leadership team. As they prepared to move to the boardroom, Victoria Chen approached Olivia privately. Ms. Washington, may I ask you something? Of course. How do you remain so composed? If I'd been treated the way you were today, I'm not sure I could have responded with such grace. Olivia considered the question carefully. It's not grace, Miss Chen. It's strategy. Getting visibly angry would only reinforce the stereotypes people like Brianna Moore already believe. Maintaining composure allows me to channel my energy toward creating systemic change rather than fighting individual battles. Chen nodded slowly. That's both inspiring and heartbreaking. It's reality, Olivia replied. But reality can be changed. That's why we're here. The boardroom of Horizon Airlines exuded power. Mahogany panels, leather chairs, and portraits of former chairmen, all white men, lining the walls. 12 board members, predominantly older white males in expensive suits, watched with barely concealed curiosity as Olivia entered alongside Blackwell and the executive team. Gentlemen, ladies, Blackwell began, taking his seat at the head of the table. We have an additional item for today's agenda. Rather than beginning with our scheduled quarterly review, we'll be addressing an urgent situation that occurred on Flight 1847 this afternoon. Reynolds nervously distributed copies of Olivia's framework document to each board member. This incident has highlighted significant operational and cultural issues requiring immediate attention. What kind of incident are we talking about? Asked Gregory Peterson, a board member known for his conservative approach to corporate governance. Instead of answering directly, Blackwell played the recording of Brianna's discriminatory comments. The room fell silent as the flight attendant's voice echoed through premium speakers. You don't deserve this meal. People like you should know your place. Several board members winced visibly. One closed his eyes, as if physically pained by what he was hearing. The passenger subjected to this treatment, Blackwell continued, was Ms. Olivia Washington, who happens to be with us today. I've invited her to present a framework for addressing both the immediate crisis and the underlying cultural issues. Peterson frowned. With all due respect, Richard, shouldn't we handle this internally? One rogue employee doesn't necessarily indicate a systemic problem. 17 similar complaints against the same employee over 8 years might. Blackwell countered. All categorized as service inconsistencies, rather than discrimination to avoid triggering oversight protocols. The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. Board members exchanged alarmed glances, suddenly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Washington," Blackwell said, "the floor is yours." Olivia stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. For the next 20 minutes, she walked the board through her comprehensive transformation strategy, one that addressed immediate crisis management, medium-term policy reforms, and long-term cultural evolution. "Gentlemen, ladies," she concluded, "what happened today isn't just a PR problem. It's a symptom of institutional blindness to discrimination. The question isn't whether incidents like mine occur. It's how many go unreported because your systems are designed to minimize rather than address them." The boardroom remained silent for several moments after she finished. Then, unexpectedly, Peterson spoke. "Ms. Washington, I've been in the airline industry for 40 years. What you've outlined today is the most comprehensive approach to this issue I've ever seen. But implementing it will be expensive and disruptive." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "More expensive than the class action lawsuit currently being organized by passengers who witnessed today's incident? More disruptive than the social media crisis unfolding as we speak? More costly than losing the trust of an entire demographic of potential premium customers?" Victoria Chen held up her tablet, displaying real-time social media statistics. #Horizon Discrimination now has over 75,000 posts. The original video has been viewed 238,000 times and shared by 3 major news outlets. The board members looked increasingly concerned as the magnitude of the crisis became clear. "I move that we adopt Ms. Washington's framework in its entirety," said Eleanor Rodriguez, one of only 2 women on the 12-person board. "And further, that we establish an independent ethics committee with actual enforcement authority to oversee its implementation." Blackwell nodded in approval. "I second the motion." As the vote proceeded around the table, Olivia watched these powerful figures grapple with a reality many of them had never been forced to confront, that the systems they'd built and maintained had embedded discrimination so deeply that it had become invisible to them, though glaringly obvious to those who experienced it. The vote was unanimous. Horizon Airlines would undertake the most comprehensive anti-discrimination overhaul in aviation history. Not because its leaders suddenly became moral visionaries, but because they finally understood that exclusion was bad for business. As the meeting adjourned, Blackwell approached Olivia. "Impressive work in there. You've effectively reshaped an entire corporation's approach to inclusion in less than 3 hours." "The real work is just beginning," Olivia replied. "Implementation will determine whether this becomes meaningful change or just another corporate initiative that fades when the pressure eases." Blackwell studied her with calculated interest. "Which brings me to my next question. Blackwell Capital is establishing a new division focused on ethical corporate transformation. We need someone with your unique combination of financial expertise and personal insight to lead it. Would you be interested in discussing the position?" Olivia regarded him thoughtfully. "I might be, but I'd need to understand exactly what you're envisioning." "Complete autonomy, executive-level compensation, and the opportunity to create systemic change across multiple industries rather than fighting these battles one company at a time." As they walked toward the exit, Olivia considered how differently this day had unfolded from what she'd expected. What began with humiliation was ending with opportunity, not just for her personally, but for creating the kind of institutional transformation she'd been working toward throughout her career. "I'll think about it," she told Blackwell, knowing that whatever she decided, the conversation they'd started today would continue to reshape not just Horizon Airlines, but potentially the entire approach to corporate inclusivity. Behind them, the boardroom emptied as executives rushed to implement the crisis management portions of Olivia's framework. The incident that Brianna Moore had triggered would indeed have lasting consequences, just not the ones the flight attendant had anticipated when she decided that a black woman didn't belong in first class. 6 months after the incident aboard Horizon Airlines Flight 1847, Olivia Washington stood before a crowded auditorium at the National Conference on Corporate Ethics. The audience, CEOs, diversity officers, and industry leaders from across the country, listened intently as she outlined the remarkable transformation that had taken place at Horizon and beyond. "The metrics speak for themselves," Olivia said, gesturing to the screen behind her. "Horizon Airlines, passenger complaints regarding discriminatory treatment have decreased by 78% in the last 2 quarters. Employee satisfaction scores are up 23%. And most significantly, the company's stock has risen 34% since implementing the Horizon Transformation Initiative." In the front row, Richard Blackwell nodded approvingly. His decision to appoint Olivia as Director of Ethical Transformation at Blackwell Capital Group had proven to be one of his most prescient business moves. Her unique ability to translate moral imperatives into measurable business outcomes had transformed not just Horizon Airlines, but 6 other companies in the Blackwell investment portfolio. "But numbers only tell part of the story," Olivia continued. "The real transformation happens in the daily interactions between employees and customers. In those moments when people feel seen, respected, and valued regardless of what they look like or where they come from." As she spoke, Olivia recalled the journey of the past 6 months. After accepting Blackwell's offer, she had assembled a team of experts in corporate culture, diversity analytics, and behavioral economics. Together, they had developed a comprehensive framework that went far beyond traditional diversity training to address the systemic roots of discrimination in corporate environments. "The Horizon model works because it creates accountability at every level," she explained to the rapt audience. "From the boardroom to the cabin crew, everyone understands that inclusion isn't just a moral imperative. It's a business necessity with measurable outcomes tied to compensation and advancement." In the third row, Nathan Reynolds watched with a complex mixture of emotions. As CEO of Horizon Airlines, he had initially resisted the sweeping changes Olivia proposed, viewing them as disruptive and potentially damaging to the company's bottom line. Now, 6 months later, he had become one of her most vocal supporters, having witnessed firsthand how inclusive practices had enhanced operational efficiency and customer loyalty. "The most powerful lesson from the Horizon case study is this," Olivia emphasized, making eye contact with executives throughout the room. "Discrimination isn't just wrong. It's expensive. It costs you talent, customers, and ultimately, shareholder value." When Victoria Chen analyzed Horizon's historical data, she discovered that flights with documented discrimination incidents had 42% lower customer retention rates and 28% more operational inefficiencies. Victoria Chen, who had been promoted to Chief Transformation Officer at Horizon, smiled from her seat beside Reynolds. The data analysis she had spearheaded had revolutionized how the airline industry understood the economic impact of inclusivity. "We've moved beyond the false dichotomy between ethical practices and profitability," Olivia continued. "The evidence is clear. Companies that create truly inclusive environments outperform their peers across all major financial indicators." As Olivia concluded her presentation, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. CEOs who had previously dismissed diversity initiatives as necessary evils to satisfy regulators were now approaching them as strategic advantages in an increasingly competitive marketplace. During the networking reception that followed, Olivia found herself surrounded by industry leaders eager to learn more about implementing the Horizon model in their own organizations. "Ms. Washington," said the CEO of a major hotel chain, "your results at Horizon are extraordinary. But I'm curious, how did you overcome the initial resistance from middle management? That's where we tend to see the most pushback against these types of initiatives." "Excellent question," Olivia replied. "The key was making the business case at every level. We didn't just tell managers that discrimination was wrong. We showed them exactly how it was impacting their performance metrics, from customer satisfaction to operational efficiency." She elaborated on how the Horizon model had included a comprehensive dashboard that allowed managers to see in real time how inclusivity measures correlated with business outcomes in their specific departments. Once they could see the direct relationship between inclusive practices and their own success metrics, resistance transformed into engagement, she explained. "It's not about abstract moral arguments, it's about demonstrating that inclusion drives results." As the conversation continued, Richard Blackwell approached with a distinguished gentleman Olivia didn't recognize. "Olivia, Blackwell said I'd like you to meet James Harrington, chairman of the Federal Aviation Administration's Ethics Committee. He's been following your work with considerable interest." Harrington extended his hand with evident respect. "Ms. Washington, what you've accomplished at Horizon has caught the attention of regulators across multiple industries. We're considering using your framework as a model for new compliance standards." That's certainly flattering, Olivia replied, but compliance standards only address the minimum threshold. The Horizon model works because it goes beyond compliance to create genuine cultural transformation. Precisely why we're interested, Harrington nodded. Traditional regulatory approaches haven't moved the needle on discrimination in transportation. Your data-driven methodology offers a more effective alternative. As they discussed the possibilities, Olivia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that fateful flight 6 months ago. What Brianna Moore had intended as an act of exclusion had instead catapulted Olivia into a position where she could reshape entire industries. Approaches to inclusivity. Later that evening, Olivia joined Blackwell, Reynolds, and Chen for dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the city. The four had formed an unlikely alliance in the months following the incident, each bringing unique perspectives to the ongoing transformation at Horizon and beyond. "I received the latest customer analytics today," Chen reported as they settled at their table. "Premium cabin bookings from minority customers are up 47% since we implemented the transparent service standards." Reynolds nodded, still somewhat amazed by the turnaround. "Our investors are thrilled. The quarterly report shows the strongest performance in Horizon's history." "And how is the cabin crew adapting to the new protocols?" Olivia asked, always focused on the human elements of transformation. "Better than expected," Reynolds admitted. "The initial resistance has given way to genuine enthusiasm. When people experience how much more smoothly operations run without the tension of unaddressed bias, they become advocates for the system rather than opponents." Blackwell, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "What interests me most is how quickly other airlines are scrambling to catch up. United announced their Equity in the Sky initiative yesterday, a pale imitation of what you've built at Horizon, but evidence that the market is responding." Olivia smiled. "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and in this case, it benefits everyone. If our competitors raise their standards for inclusive service, the entire industry improves." Speaking of improvement, Blackwell said, "I've been approached by the leadership at Global Railways. They've been watching Horizon's transformation and want to implement something similar across their passenger services." Chen raised an eyebrow. "That's a massive undertaking. Their system spans 3 continents with thousands of employees." "Which is precisely why they need Olivia's expertise," Blackwell replied. "The scale of the challenge matches the scale of the opportunity." Olivia considered this thoughtfully. Her work at Horizon had proven that systemic change was possible, but expanding to an organization like Global Railways would test the scalability of the model in ways they hadn't yet explored. "I'd want to conduct a thorough assessment first," she said. "Every industry has unique dynamics that affect how discrimination manifests and how it can be addressed." "Of course," Blackwell agreed. "But imagine the impact if we could replicate Horizon's success across the entire transportation sector. We're talking about fundamental changes to how millions of people experience travel." The conversation continued, weighing possibilities and challenges, but Olivia found her mind drifting momentarily to the beginning of this journey. She recalled sitting in seat 3A, maintaining her composure as Brianna Moore publicly humiliated her. In that moment, she couldn't have imagined how that painful experience would transform into such powerful positive change. As if reading her thoughts, Reynolds said quietly, "I sometimes wonder what became of Brianna Moore." The table fell silent. None of them had mentioned the former flight attendant in months. "She's working at a call center in Phoenix," Chen finally said. "One of our HR managers knows someone there. Apparently, she's been unable to find employment in the transportation industry." Olivia absorbed this information without satisfaction or regret. The goal was never punishment. It was transformation. "I hope she's had the opportunity to reflect and grow from the experience." "That's remarkably generous," Reynolds observed. "It's practical," Olivia corrected him. "Lasting change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from creating systems where people understand why inclusivity matters and have the tools to practice it consistently." Blackwell raised his glass. "To systems change, and the remarkable woman who showed us how to achieve it." As they toasted, Olivia reflected on the ripple effects that had spread from that single incident. Captain Reed had been promoted to Director of Crew Training, where he was revolutionizing how flight crews were prepared to handle diversity challenges. The college student who had recorded the discrimination had launched a popular social media series documenting corporate accountability moments. Even the elderly businessman who had nodded approvingly at Brianna's behavior had reportedly written a heartfelt apology after seeing himself in news coverage of the incident. The next morning, Olivia led a workshop for 50 corporate diversity officers eager to learn how to implement the Horizon model in their organizations. As she guided them through the methodology, she emphasized the core principle that had driven her approach from the beginning. Transformation doesn't happen through shame or blame, she explained. It happens when people understand that inclusion is in their self-interest, professionally, financially, and ultimately morally. A participant raised her hand. But how do you address the people who simply don't care? The ones who are comfortable with their biases and see no reason to change. You create systems where their biases have consequences, Olivia replied. At Horizon, we implemented transparent metrics that directly link inclusive behavior to performance evaluations, compensation, and advancement opportunities. When people realize that their biases are limiting their success, even the most resistant individuals begin to reconsider. Another participant, the diversity officer for a major retail chain, asked, "What about the argument that these initiatives create reverse discrimination against the majority? We hear that frequently from mid-level managers." Olivia nodded, having anticipated this question. That's why data is so crucial to this work. At Horizon, we didn't implement quotas or preferential treatment. We created objective service standards that applied equally to all passengers and measured compliance consistently. The results showed that certain groups had been receiving systematically different treatment. Addressing that disparity isn't reverse discrimination. It's simply good business. As the workshop progressed, Olivia guided the participants through practical exercises designed to help them identify systemic biases in their own organizations and develop measurable interventions to address them. Remember, she emphasized, transformation isn't about making people feel guilty for past behaviors. It's about giving them tools to succeed in a future where inclusion is a competitive advantage. By the afternoon, the energy in the room had shifted from cautious interest to genuine enthusiasm. These corporate leaders, many of whom had been struggling to make progress in their organizations, were beginning to see a pathway forward that aligned moral imperatives with business outcomes. The most powerful tool you have, Olivia told them as the workshop concluded, is your ability to translate ethical principles into business language. When executives understand that discrimination costs them money, talent, and market share, inclusion becomes a strategic priority rather than a compliance burden. As the participants filed out, many stopping to thank her for the insights, Olivia noticed James Harrington from the FAA waiting patiently by the door. "Ms. Washington," he said when the room had cleared, "I wanted to continue our conversation from last night. The Transportation Department is forming a task force to develop new industry standards for inclusive service, and we'd like you to chair it." Olivia hadn't expected this. "That's a significant commitment, Mr. Harrington. And regulatory work moves at a different pace than corporate transformation." "Precisely why we need your perspective," he replied. Traditional regulatory approaches have failed to address the systemic nature of discrimination in transportation. Your data-driven methodology offers a more effective framework. As they discussed the possibility, Olivia considered the broader implications. Regulatory standards based on the Horizon model could potentially transform not just one company or one industry, but the entire approach to preventing discrimination in public accommodations. "I'd need to understand the scope and authority of the task force," she said finally. "Meaningful change requires more than recommendations. It requires enforcement mechanisms with real consequences." Harrington nodded in agreement. "The Secretary is prepared to grant unprecedented authority to this initiative. Your work at Horizon has convinced key stakeholders that traditional approaches are insufficient." Later that day, as Olivia prepared for the conference's closing panel, she received a text message from Victoria Chen. "Just received Q2 numbers. Customer satisfaction in premium cabins up 37%. Employee retention improved 24%. Board is thrilled." These results validated what Olivia had been advocating all along, that creating truly inclusive environments wasn't just ethically right, It was economically advantageous. Companies that treated all customers with dignity and respect outperformed those that didn't, a truth that was now backed by irrefutable data. The closing panel brought together Olivia, Richard Blackwell, and executives from 3 major corporations that had implemented versions of the Horizon model. As they discussed their experiences, a common theme emerged: the surprising discovery that addressing discrimination had revealed and resolved numerous other operational inefficiencies. When we began tracking service consistency across different passenger demographics, the COO of a major cruise line explained, we discovered patterns of inefficiency that went far beyond bias. The same systems that allowed discriminatory treatment also permitted other forms of service breakdown. Blackwell nodded in agreement. What Olivia has demonstrated across multiple industries is that inclusivity isn't a separate initiative. It's a core component of operational excellence. Companies that get this right perform better across every metric we measure. As the panel concluded and the conference drew to a close, Olivia found herself surrounded by attendees eager to share how her work had influenced their approaches to corporate ethics and inclusion. Your presentation last year changed how our entire executive team views diversity initiatives, the CEO of a tech company told her. We've implemented your metrics-based approach across all departments, and the results have been transformative. A flight attendant from a competing airline approached with tears in her eyes. I witnessed similar incidents throughout my career and felt powerless to address them. The protocols you developed at Horizon have been adopted by my airline, and for the first time in 20 years, I feel equipped to ensure all our passengers are treated with dignity. These personal testimonials reinforced what the data had already proven, that systemic change was possible when the right frameworks were in place. What had begun as one woman's humiliating experience in first class had catalyzed a movement that was reshaping how entire industries understood and addressed discrimination. As Olivia prepared to leave the conference, Richard Blackwell approached with a final thought. 6 months ago, when Brianna Moore decided you didn't belong in first class, she couldn't have imagined the consequences of that decision, he said. Not just for herself, but for an entire industry. Olivia smiled thoughtfully. The most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or retribution, it's transformation, not just of individuals, but of the systems that enable their behavior. And you've proven it's possible, Blackwell added. That's your true legacy. As they walked toward the exit, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from that moment of humiliation in seat 3A to becoming an architect of systemic change. The experience had reinforced what she had always believed, that even the most painful encounters could become catalysts for positive transformation when approached with strategic vision rather than reactive emotion. The Horizon model was now being implemented across multiple industries, creating measurable improvements in how companies served diverse customers and developed inclusive workforces. What had begun as one woman's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment had evolved into a movement that was reshaping corporate America's approach to inclusivity, proving once again that dignity, when backed by data and determination, was an unstoppable force for change. 2 years after the transformative incident aboard Horizon Airlines Flight 1847, Olivia Washington stood at the entrance of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, preparing to deliver the keynote address at the unveiling of a new exhibit, Everyday Resistance: How Small Moments Changed American Business. The exhibit chronicled pivotal moments when individual acts of dignity in the face of discrimination had catalyzed systemic change across industries. Olivia's experience, now known in business schools nationwide as the Horizon Case, occupied a central installation, complete with interactive displays showing the measurable impact of the Horizon model across multiple sectors. As attendees gathered in the Grand Hall, Olivia took a moment to reflect on the remarkable journey that had brought her here. What had begun as a humiliating encounter in first class had evolved into a movement that was fundamentally reshaping how American businesses understood and addressed discrimination. Ms. Washington, said the museum's director, approaching with barely contained excitement, the transportation secretary has just arrived. She's particularly eager to discuss the impact of the federal transportation equity standards you helped develop. Olivia nodded, spotting Secretary Garcia making her way through the crowd. The comprehensive regulations implemented 8 months ago had codified key elements of the Horizon model into federal law, establishing clear metrics, transparent reporting requirements, and meaningful penalties for non-compliance across all forms of public transportation. Olivia, Secretary Garcia greeted her warmly, The preliminary data from the first 2 quarters under the new standards is remarkable. Discrimination complaints down 63% nationwide. Customer satisfaction up 28% across all demographics. And most surprisingly, operational efficiency improved 17% across participating carriers. Not surprising at all, Olivia replied with a confident smile. When companies stop wasting energy maintaining artificial hierarchies and start focusing on consistent service quality, efficiency naturally follows. The secretary nodded in agreement. The president mentioned your work specifically in last week's economic briefing. There's growing interest in expanding this regulatory framework to other service industries. Before Olivia could respond, Richard Blackwell appeared at her side, looking distinguished as ever in his perfectly tailored suit. At 78, he had gradually stepped back from daily operations at Blackwell Capital Group, but had remained fully engaged in the ethical transformation initiative that Olivia now led. Madam Secretary. He greeted Garcia with a respectful nod. I hope you're prepared to explain to taxpayers why it took the government so long to adopt standards that have been demonstrating extraordinary results in the private sector for 2 years now. Garcia laughed. Always the provocateur, Richard. But point taken. Sometimes the public sector is slow to recognize innovation, even when the evidence is overwhelming. As they conversed, Olivia noticed a familiar face approaching hesitantly from across the hall. Victoria Chen, now CEO of Horizon Airlines following Nathan Reynolds' retirement, had become one of corporate America's most outspoken advocates for inclusive business practices. Victoria, Olivia greeted her warmly. Perfect timing. I was just about to mention Horizon's latest quarterly results to the secretary. Chen beamed with pride. 3rd consecutive quarter of record profits. Premium cabin bookings up 42% year over year. And most significantly, our employee retention rate is the highest in the industry. Turns out people prefer working in environments where dignity is a core value, not an afterthought. Secretary Garcia raised an eyebrow, impressed. And to think, 2 years ago critics were warning that these initiatives would damage profitability and hamper operational flexibility. A perspective rooted in the false assumption that discrimination is somehow efficient, Olivia observed. The data has consistently proven otherwise across every industry we've studied. As they continued their conversation, Olivia noticed a young black woman in a flight attendant's uniform watching their group from a respectful distance, clearly gathering courage to approach. Something about her reminded Olivia of herself at that age. Determined, capable, but navigating spaces not designed with her in mind. Excuse me, Olivia said to her companions. There's someone I should greet. She crossed the room, extending her hand to the young flight attendant. I don't believe we've met. I'm Olivia Washington. I know who you are, Ms. Washington, the woman replied with a mixture of nervousness and determination. I'm Tiana Johnson, lead flight attendant with Horizon Airlines. I've been hoping for a chance to thank you personally. Thank me? For what exactly? For creating a workplace where I can focus on excellence instead of constantly navigating other people's biases, Tiana explained. I was hired the week after the new standards were implemented. My trainers used recordings from your incident as part of our service consistency training. Olivia was momentarily taken aback. They show footage of that incident during training? Yes, ma'am, Tiana confirmed. But not in the way you might think. It's paired with data showing how discriminatory service impacts customer retention, operational efficiency, and brand perception. They use it to demonstrate why consistent excellence benefits everyone, the company, employees, and passengers. This unexpected detail moved Olivia deeply. The transformation of her painful experience into a teaching tool that empowered, rather than shamed, represented exactly the kind of systemic change she had been working toward. That's remarkably thoughtful implementation, she said finally. Tiana nodded enthusiastically. The Horizon model has changed everything about our workplace culture. Performance metrics are completely transparent. Service consistency is measured across all passenger demographics. And advancement is based on measurable excellence, not who you know or how you look. As they continued their conversation, Olivia learned that Tiana had recently been promoted to the airline's Service Quality Committee, where she helped analyze data patterns to identify potential inconsistencies before they became systemic problems. Last month, we identified a slight service variance on international routes that might have gone unnoticed under the old system, Tiana explained. We implemented targeted training that eliminated the discrepancy within 3 weeks. That's the power of the framework you created. It catches potential problems before they become entrenched patterns. Their conversation was interrupted by the museum director announcing that the program would begin in 10 minutes. Olivia excused herself to prepare for her keynote address, but not before exchanging contact information with Tiana. "I'd value your perspective on some initiatives we're developing for international carriers," Olivia told her. "The frontline experience you bring would be invaluable to our research team." As Olivia made her way to the stage area, she was stopped by a distinguished older woman she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Washington," the woman said, extending her hand. "Eleanor Thompson. I was aboard Flight 1847 that day. Seat 4B. Olivia searched her memory, then placed the woman, one of the first-class passengers who had witnessed Brianna Moore's discriminatory behavior, but had remained silent throughout the encounter. "I remember," Olivia said simply, waiting to hear what the woman wanted. "I've wanted to apologize to you for 2 years," Eleanor said, her voice tight with emotion. "I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong. But I said nothing. Did nothing. My silence made me complicit." Olivia studied the woman thoughtfully. "What would you do differently now?" Quote, "Everything," Eleanor replied with conviction. "After watching that incident and my own cowardice, I've spent 2 years working with my church's racial justice initiative. We've been studying the Horizon model and implementing similar accountability systems within our community organizations. This was an unexpected ripple effect Olivia hadn't considered, how witnessing that moment of discrimination and its consequences might transform even those who had been passive bystanders. "Thank you for telling me this," Olivia said sincerely. "Systems change when individuals choose to participate differently within them. Your work matters." As she finally reached the stage area, Olivia found Richard Blackwell waiting for her. "Ready for your keynote?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "More than ready," Olivia confirmed, "though I keep discovering new dimensions to the impact of that day. It's humbling, really." Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. "When I witnessed Brianna Moore's behavior 2 years ago, I recognized it as a symptom of deeper institutional failure. What I couldn't have anticipated was how thoroughly you would transform that moment into a movement." The museum director approached, indicating it was time to begin. As Olivia took her position behind the podium, she surveyed the diverse audience gathered before her: corporate leaders, government officials, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens, all united by interest in how individual dignity could drive systemic change. "2 years ago," Olivia began, her voice clear and confident, "I boarded a flight from Chicago to Dallas. What happened next has been well documented. A flight attendant decided, based solely on my appearance, that I didn't belong in the first-class cabin I had paid to occupy." The audience listened intently, many already familiar with the basics of the story that had been covered extensively in business publications and case studies. "But this isn't a story about discrimination," Olivia continued. "It's a story about transformation, not just of one airline or one industry, but of how American business understands the relationship between inclusivity and excellence." She gestured to the interactive displays surrounding the exhibit. "The data speaks for itself. Companies that have implemented the Horizon model have seen customer satisfaction increase by an average of 32%. Employee retention has improved by 27%. And perhaps most significantly for skeptics, profitability has increased by an average of 24% across all participating organizations." As she spoke, Olivia moved away from the podium, engaging directly with her audience. "These aren't soft metrics or feel-good initiatives. This is hard data proving what many of us have always known: that dignity isn't just a moral imperative, it's a business advantage." She continued by highlighting specific case studies from the transportation, hospitality, and retail sectors, each demonstrating how implementing the Horizon model's accountability frameworks had transformed not just customer experiences, but entire organizational cultures. "What makes this approach different from traditional diversity initiatives," Olivia explained, "is its focus on measurable behavior rather than beliefs or intentions. We don't ask companies to care about inclusion. We show them why it matters to their bottom line. We don't rely on goodwill. We create systems where excellence requires equity. As her keynote progressed, Olivia addressed the challenges of scaling the model, the resistance encountered in certain sectors, and the ongoing work of adapting the framework to different cultural contexts for international implementation. The most common objection we hear is that these standards create excessive regulatory burden, she noted. But the data shows the opposite. When companies implement consistent service standards across all demographics, they actually reduce complexity and increase operational efficiency. She pointed to a large screen displaying comparative metrics before and after implementation at 12 major corporations. These aren't marginal improvements. They represent fundamental transformations in how these organizations function, not because their leaders suddenly became more virtuous, but because they recognized that discrimination was costing them money, talent, and market share. As she moved toward her conclusion, Olivia reflected on the personal journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago on that flight, I had a choice. I could respond to discrimination with anger, justified but ultimately unproductive, or with strategic vision. I chose the latter, not because it was easy, but because it offered the possibility of changing systems rather than just confronting individuals. She paused, making eye contact with audience members throughout the hall. That's the lesson I hope this exhibit imparts, that individual dignity, when coupled with strategic action, can transform not just moments but movements, not just companies but cultures. The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic. As Olivia stepped away from the microphone, Secretary Garcia leaned toward Richard Blackwell. "The President needs to hear this directly. Would Ms. Washington be willing to brief the Economic Council next month?" Blackwell smiled. "I suspect she'd be delighted to expand the conversation to that level." The reception that followed the keynote was filled with meaningful connections. Corporate executives sought Olivia's insights on implementing the model in their organizations. Civil rights advocates discussed how similar frameworks might be applied to housing, education, and healthcare. Government officials explored the potential for expanding the regulatory standards to additional sectors. Amid these conversations, Olivia found herself approached by an unexpected visitor, Nathan Reynolds, the former CEO of Horizon Airlines who had initially resisted the transformation initiative. "Ms. Washington," he greeted her with genuine respect, "your keynote was remarkable, though not surprising given what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Olivia replied. "I understand you're enjoying retirement." "More than I expected," he admitted, "though I stay connected to the industry. I've been consulting with several airlines interested in implementing versions of the Horizon model." Olivia raised an eyebrow, surprised by this development. "That's quite a shift from your initial perspective." Reynolds nodded, acknowledging the observation. "When we first met, I viewed your proposals as threats to operational efficiency and profitability. I couldn't have been more wrong, and I'm not too proud to admit it. The data has been irrefutable." This honest acknowledgement from a former skeptic represented yet another dimension of the transformation Olivia had catalyzed, the ability to change not just systems, but the perspectives of those who maintain them. As the evening progressed, Olivia found a quiet moment to explore the exhibit itself. The museum had done a remarkable job documenting not just the incident aboard Flight 1847, but the methodical transformation that followed, from the initial Horizon implementation to the federal standards now reshaping the transportation industry. One installation particularly moved her, a video wall showing interviews with employees across multiple companies who had experienced the shift from discriminatory systems to the accountability frameworks of the Horizon model. "For the first time in my career, I feel like I can focus on excellence without constantly navigating other people's biases," said a hotel concierge in one clip. "The transparent metrics changed everything," explained an airline gate agent in another. "When service consistency is measured across all passenger demographics, the data speaks for itself. You can't argue with the numbers." "I was skeptical at first," admitted a retail manager. "I thought these were just more diversity requirements that would complicate our operations. Instead, they simplified everything by establishing clear standards that apply universally." As Olivia watched these testimonials, Richard Blackwell joined her. "Quite something to see your work memorialized this way," he observed. "It's not my work," Olivia corrected him. "It's the work of thousands of people who seized the opportunity to transform their organizations. I just provided a framework that has fundamentally reshaped how American business understands the relationship between inclusivity and excellence." Blackwell reminded her, "Don't diminish what you've accomplished. As they continued through the exhibit, they encountered a particularly powerful installation, a data visualization showing the economic impact of discrimination across multiple industries before and after implementation of the Horizon model. $8 billion, Olivia noted, pointing to the annual cost of discriminatory practices in the transportation sector alone. That's what companies were losing to inefficiency, reduced customer loyalty, litigation, and talent attrition before implementing these standards. Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. And yet, for decades, business leaders insisted that addressing discrimination was too costly, too complicated, or too disruptive. Because they were measuring the wrong things, Olivia explained. They saw inclusion as a cost center rather than a driver of excellence. The Horizon model changed that perspective by providing clear metrics that connected inclusive practices to business outcomes. As they completed their tour of the exhibit, they were joined by Victoria Chen, who had been engaged in a lengthy conversation with Secretary Garcia about international implementation of the equity standards. The Secretary is proposing a global initiative through the International Air Transport Association, Chen reported excitedly. She believes the Horizon model could become the worldwide standard for service consistency across all forms of public transportation. That would be extraordinary, Olivia acknowledged. Though cross-cultural implementation brings additional challenges we'll need to address. Which is why we need you to lead the International Working Group, Chen replied. No one else has your combination of financial expertise, data analytics skills, and personal insight into how discrimination operates across different contexts. As they discussed the possibilities, Olivia realized how far the ripple effects had spread from that single moment of discrimination 2 years ago. What Brianna Moore had intended as an act of exclusion had instead launched a movement that was reshaping not just one company or one industry, but the fundamental relationship between inclusivity and excellence in global business. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Olivia found herself alone in the museum's contemplative space, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here and the work that still lay ahead. "Ms. Washington," a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Tiana Johnson, the young flight attendant from earlier. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to share something before I left." "Not at all," Olivia assured her. "What's on your mind?" "Earlier today I told you how your work had changed Horizon Airlines," Tiana began. "But I didn't tell you how it changed me personally." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Before the Horizon model, I didn't believe I could succeed in this industry. I'd seen too many people who looked like me pushed aside, undermined, or forced to work twice as hard for half the recognition." Olivia nodded in understanding, remembering her own similar experiences throughout her career. "The transparent metrics changed everything," Tiana continued. "When performance is measured consistently across all employees, excellence becomes undeniable. I was promoted to lead flight attendant in my second year because the data showed I was excelling in every measurable category, not because someone decided to give diversity a chance. This, Olivia realized, was perhaps the most powerful impact of the work she'd done, creating systems where excellence could be recognized regardless of what package it came in, where dignity wasn't something to be granted by the powerful, but an inherent right upheld by measurable standards. The system you created doesn't just protect passengers from discrimination," Tiana concluded. "It protects employees from having our excellence dismissed or diminished. That's the real transformation, not just in how we're treated, but in what becomes possible for us to achieve." As Olivia made her way home that evening, she reflected on these conversations and the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. What had begun as a humiliating encounter in first class had evolved into a movement that was fundamentally reshaping how businesses understood the relationship between inclusivity and excellence. The Horizon model had proven that dignity wasn't just a moral imperative, it was a business advantage. Companies that created truly inclusive environments outperformed their peers across all major financial indicators. What skeptics had dismissed as costly social engineering had proven to be sound business strategy, validated by irrefutable data and measurable outcomes. Most importantly, the transformation continued to unfold in ways Olivia couldn't have anticipated. Each implementation of the model created new insights, new applications, and new possibilities for extending the framework to additional sectors and contexts. The ripple effects spread wider with each passing month, changing not just policies and practices but fundamental assumptions about who belonged in which spaces and what constituted excellence. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia found herself thinking of Brianna Moore, not with anger or resentment, but with a certain philosophical appreciation. The flight attendant's discriminatory action had inadvertently catalyzed a movement that was creating more equitable systems not just for Olivia, but for millions of others who had long navigated spaces never designed with them in mind. It was a powerful reminder that transformation often began in moments of challenge rather than comfort, and that dignity, when coupled with strategic vision, could indeed change the world. One flight, one company, one industry at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.